Hello and welcome to The Game Changers, the podcast that celebrates trailblazing women in sport. I'm Sue Anstiss, and I'd like to start with a big thank you to our partners Sport England, who support The Game Changers through a National Lottery Award. I'm delighted to say that this, the 13th season of the podcast, is a serialisation of my book, Game On, The Unstoppable Rise of Women's Sport. In each episode, you'll hear a new chapter covering the history and challenges women's sport has faced over the years, the incredible growth we're now seeing, and the trailblazers who have led the way. The first episode includes the book's foreword, written by Baroness Tanni Grey Thompson, my introduction, and the first chapter, Why Does It Matter? Thanks for listening. For Matt, Molly, Daisy and Tess, in loving memory of Roy and Pat Anstiss. Foreword by Tanni Grey Thompson, February 2021. What does the future hold for women's sport and why does it matter? Questions that many of us have been trying to resolve throughout our careers. For those who have seen the impact sport has had on their own lives and those around them, whether as an athlete, administrator, coach, fan or parent, we know the topic is complex. I've spent many years being interviewed and questioned on the validity of women's sport. In the past, it was always easy to find someone who would simply argue that women's sport was less than men's. The old attitude which questions whether women can play sport and still be feminine, I cannot believe this is still on the table, is one of the most frustrating things to have to deal with. This book brings together powerful voices of those who have significant experience at all levels to offer solutions for the future. It offers a compelling history of women in sport alongside a personal perspective of what the future might hold. It covers some of the biggest issues facing women in sport, from menstruation and misogyny through to lesbianism and race. That it is still not easy to have some of these discussions speaks volumes. Over the course of history, there have been many steps forward and then back, but in recent years the forward motion has accelerated. Barriers are being broken down, change is happening, and it's exciting to see sports and participants embracing the opportunities to discuss investment, profile and participation. Understanding the role of sponsors, media and fans will be key to unlocking the future. The 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games were a chance to think differently about how our nation views female sport. No single Games is going to change the world, but the success that ensued, with so many British women winning medals, meant that it has since become known as the Women's Games. As a sports fan, this felt like a moment that would be hard to dial back from. But how do we keep things moving in the right direction, especially as we emerge from a pandemic that has once again accentuated the disparity in men's and women's sport? It is the strength of this book that not everyone featured shares the same view about the way forward. Sue challenges us to ask how and when further change is going to happen. What do we need to invest in, not just financially, but also morally and ethically, to ensure we can take women's sport to where it should be? We can't take anything for granted, but the future looks bright. Introduction. We don't want to take over, we just want to take part. It's been a long time coming, but the landscape for women's sport is finally beginning to shift. In the past 10 years, we've seen significant improvements in sponsorship, prize money, and professional contracts for sportswomen around the world. There's been increased media coverage for women's sport and recognition of female athletes as role models and activists for social change. The participation gap between men and women is closing, and after decades of sport being led and managed by men, we're finally seeing more women taking influential roles as board directors, editors and producers, coaches and officials. Yet despite this fantastic and long overdue progress, female athletes still don't get equal funding or opportunities, even though they train as hard and make the same sacrifices as their male counterparts. In many sports, women receive less prize money, get fewer professional contracts, less sponsorship, and a tiny fraction of the media coverage. Girls often don't have the access to the same level of sports, funding, and facilities as boys. And across the world, women are still less likely to take part in sport than the men around them. I love sport. Growing up, I was a sporty girl, studied sport at university, and have been lucky enough to work in the sports sector for over 30 years. But as those years have passed, I've become increasingly concerned about the massive disparity for women in sport. This inequality makes me angry, but I see great hope for the future. Sport has an extraordinary, unique capacity to challenge and change society. It brings joy and hope to millions. It can positively impact individuals, families, communities, and nations, improving physical and mental health, reducing loneliness, and building self-esteem and happiness. Sport challenges us to think differently about injustices in society. It's also a multi-billion-pound commercial industry that can transform lives, businesses, nations, and regions. I recognise that sometimes it can be hard for women working in sport to call out the inequalities they experience and to agitate for change. The athletes, coaches, journalists, and administrators don't always want to be branded as difficult or risk being excluded or penalised in the future. We're supposed to be grateful for what we have, happy with small improvements rather than forcefully demanding more. Like many historical fights for gender equality, there's often a backlash from men who feel threatened by change. Does allowing women to have more of something mean that they will have to make sacrifices and lose out themselves? Does equal pay or prize money for female athletes and teams result in less income for the men? Will increased media coverage of women's sport result in less coverage of men's sport? Are there fewer opportunities for men to join boards and lead sports because women are now stepping up to take on those roles? We're living in an age of huge positive change as society recognises injustices that have been experienced by previous generations and attempts to make amends. I'm proud and excited to have witnessed the impact of powerful movements in recent years, including Black Lives Matter, #MeToo, the Irish referendum on abortion law, He for She, and the campaign for same-sex marriage. But significant social change doesn't occur without some pain. Deeds, not words, was the motto of the suffragettes, and as Frederick Douglass said in campaigning for the end of the slave trade in the US, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. Power concedes nothing without a demand. Changing the world won't make people like you. It will cause you pain. It will be difficult. It will feel like a struggle. While I work in sport, my livelihood is perhaps less dependent than others on towing the party line. I used to run a sports public relations agency and was sometimes concerned about the negative impact of me publicly calling out the inequalities I saw, criticising the media for its poor coverage of women's sport, the governing bodies and teams for their unbalanced funding, or the sponsors for not doing enough to activate the female sports properties they might have invested in. I'm less concerned about this now than I might have been a decade ago. Perhaps it's my age, or the fact that I now appreciate action is essential if we're ever going to create the change required in women's sport. I chose the title, Game On, for this book because it expresses how I feel about women's sport right now. The dictionary says game on is used to show that a competition of some kind is about to start, usually when you are excited about it. The slang dictionary says it's an expression used to kick off a contest, issue a challenge, or express general enthusiasm. That's it for me. Excited and enthusiastic for the competition, but recognising there is still a big challenge ahead. There's a double narrative for women's sport right now. On one hand, there is much to celebrate with vastly increased media profile, investment and respect for female athletes. Yet in parallel, so much has still not changed, and in some cases, we're moving in the wrong direction. This book follows my journey to understand the history of women's sport, why things are finally changing, what's stopping more rapid progress, and how we can ensure this positive revolution in sport continues. How women's sport can transform society for women and girls far beyond the field of play. I explore the following big questions. Why should we be concerned that half the population have been deprived of access to something so culturally powerful? Why have women been excluded from the world of sport for centuries, their bodies considered too weak to run, jump and throw like men? Why are things changing now? And what has made sponsors and the media finally wake up to the potential for women's sport? Who have been the game changers, the trailblazing women, knocking down the barriers and challenging the status quo for women in the future? I've focused on the UK. It's where I live and where I've experienced most women's sport. But much of what I share is globally relevant. I've had the privilege of talking to a range of thought leaders, from high-profile Olympic and Paralympic champions, sports broadcasters and journalists through to sports scientists, CEOs, officials and sponsors. I share some of the stories from the trailblazing women in sport I've spoken to for my podcast, The Game Changers, and I also reveal some of my own experiences, having worked, volunteered, studied and played sport all of my life. My ambition for Game On is that it should offer an enlightened view of women's sport, opening minds to the importance it holds in society and giving people the rationale, confidence and means to call out inequality when they see it. The book is a manifesto for women's sport, providing a rallying cry to ensure that the progress we are currently seeing is maintained for the long term and highlighting how women and men can play their part in keeping this momentum moving in the right direction. Let's redress the balance and bring more equality to sport, and through that, more equality to society. Game on. Chapter 1. Why does it matter? I just think, if you grow up as a girl, it's like there's a room in your house that you're not allowed to go in. That's how I see sport in life. There's a sphere in the world that is hugely powerful and influential that political leaders fall over themselves to get involved with, and women are obstructed from that space. I think we cannot live a whole and complete life. We cannot play a full role in society as long as that's the case. Anna Kessel, The Game Changers Podcast, 2019. Sport is something unique in culture. It has enormous potential to be socially disruptive. Sport plays an important role in reinforcing national identity. In many countries, it provides the most popular display of nationalistic behaviour. It's a cultural phenomenon that can unite or divide us like nothing else. Enormous national pride and unity results from success at Olympic Games and World Cups, alongside the tribal division of opposing football fans. Sport makes us healthier and happier as individuals, families and communities. Sport provides a sense of belonging. Sport's powerful force for good has long been accepted. It was in May 2000 that Nelson Mandela said sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people in the way that little else does. Sport can create hope where once there was only despair. It is more powerful than governments in breaking down racial barriers. It laughs in the face of all types of discrimination. Sport is essential for the economy, from the billions of pounds generated by the commercial sports sector through to the huge cost benefits of a healthy population less dependent on the NHS. For many people, sport is their go-to conversation starter. Business deals are completed over a round of golf or in a hospitality box at a major sporting event. All TV and radio news bulletins end with sport. There are sports pages at the back of every newspaper. Governments and brands invest billions in sport every year. Yet until now, women have not had equal access to sport and all the benefits it offers. In 2021, that can't be right. There's no doubt in my mind that sport reflects and magnifies key gender issues in society. The momentous positive shift we've seen in women's sport since the London Olympics in 2012 is in line with the so-called fourth wave of feminism and its focus on empowering women to ensure greater female representation in politics and business. Attitudes around women have changed. From women's bodies to women's rights, powerful campaigns have seen women collaborate and mobilise to call out harassment and misogyny, demanding equal pay and equal opportunities with the likes of #MeToo, No More Page 3, Time's Up, the Everyday Sexism Project and the Women's Marches. While historically, traditional feminists didn't embrace the potential of sport, in recent years there's been a powerful interaction between feminism and female athleticism. Generation Z, those born from the mid-1990s to the 2010s, such as my 3 daughters, embracing equality and inclusivity has coincided with huge changes in women's sport. A massive growth in viewing figures for major female sports events saw a global audience of 1.2 billion tune in for the 2019 FIFA Women's World Cup. 11.7 million of us watched England's women's team, the Lionesses, in the semi-finals. Professional contracts are now in place for UK women in football, cricket, rugby and netball. Globally, major brands including Barclays, Vitality, Investec, SSE, Visa, Pepsi, Budweiser, Cadbury and Boots are sponsoring women's leagues and events, and increased numbers of women hold senior roles and board positions with sports organisations. Interest in women's sport has never been higher. Recent key moments have engaged the wider public in discussions around why women's sport matters to society. As athlete activism grows, it's women who are at the forefront. For many years in the US, WNBA players have led the way in the fight for racial justice and gender equality. Throughout the 2020 basketball season, they partnered with a #SayHerName campaign to raise awareness of police brutality against Black women. They stopped playing for 2 nights in response to the police shooting of Jacob Blake, a 29-year-old Black American, and were active participants in campaigns to encourage people to vote in elections. US soccer player Megan Rapinoe, using her global profile to encourage us all to take action for social change. Australian rules football player Taylor Harris, taking a stand and igniting a conversation around sexism in sport after an impressive photo of her in full flight attracted a flood of offensive remarks online. WNBA professional player Sue Bird wearing a Vote Warnock shirt in protest at Kelly Loeffler, the senator and team owner opposed to Black Lives Matter. Gymnast Caitlin Ahashi performing a perfect 10 floor routine which went viral and generated discussions around body image. Belarus basketball star Yelena Luchenko being jailed for taking a stand for freedom in her country following the fraudulent election of President Alexander Lukashenko. Naomi Osaka wearing face masks with the names of the victims of police brutality at the US Open, and closer to home, rugby players Florence Williams and Rona Lloyd calling out Canterbury of New Zealand over their use of airbrushed models rather than female players to launch the new Irish rugby kit. The list is endless. Sport's unique positioning means that it has a huge impact on the way in which women are viewed in wider society. The increased positive profile of successful female athletes is important for women in all walks of life, not just in sport. It's important that we see women in the sports pages of newspapers, on websites and apps, appearing on TV programmes and talking on radio alongside their male counterparts. This increased, balanced profile will bring confidence for women to achieve anything. It can also counterbalance the negative portrayal and stereotyping of women in the media, showing strong, positive athlete role models. How does it make young girls feel to never see their sporting heroes in the media? What subliminal messages are we sending our daughters when they grow up in a society that portrays women's sport as less important than men's? What does this say to them about how they are valued in life and work? As Serena Williams so eloquently explained in 1998 as she questioned the lack of equal pay at Wimbledon, imagine if you're a little girl, you're growing up, you practice as hard as you can with girls, with boys. You have a dream. You fight, you work, you sacrifice to get to this stage. You work as hard as anyone you know. And then you get to this stage and you're told you're not the same as a boy. Almost as good, but not quite the same. Think how devastating and demoralising that would be. Dame Sue Campbell, head of the women's game at the FA, told me why she believes football has the potential to change women's lives more broadly in society. If we can change attitudes to women and girls playing football, I wonder if we can change people's attitudes to women in business. I wonder if we can change people's attitudes to the way they are in families. I wonder if we can change attitudes towards what's possible. If a little girl wants to be an astronaut, why shouldn't she? If a little girl wants to be an engineer, why shouldn't she? If a little girl wants to be a great football player, why shouldn't she? And if we can open that door in football, I wonder if we can open other doors as well. I recently heard and loved the phrase vicarious confidence. The feeling that comes from watching someone like you achieve something magnificent, which in turn gives you the belief that you can achieve. Little girls growing up never seeing women's sport miss out on that opportunity to feel pride in female achievements, and they are also less likely to believe they can achieve in sport too. If you can't see it, you can't be it. Sports have seen a huge uplift in female participation following increased media coverage. Just 6 months after the England netball team won Commonwealth gold in 2018, regular participation in the sport had increased by 130,000. Such was the impact of the Roses' magnificent win on Australia's Gold Coast that the governing body's session finder had 2,000% more hits in the weeks after it. The FA saw over 850,000 more committed participants after the FIFA Women's World Cup in 2019. Girls who decide sport is not for them because they've never seen other women playing sport at a high level also potentially miss out on the benefits of sports participation. Aside from all the physical and mental health benefits of playing sport, there are the character-building elements of self-confidence, teamwork, leadership, loyalty, focus, learning how to lose gracefully, and so on. Those personal characteristics provide a valuable foundation for future life, and they may help in business too. Research from Ernst & Young in 2013 showed that 94% of women in C-suite roles, the highest-ranking executives in the company, had played sports. A large majority of women in the study, 70%, said that a background in sport was helpful to their career progression because involvement in sport helped them to work better in teams. Many others, 76%, said that the performance of work teams can be improved by applying the techniques and behaviours learned in sport to the corporate world. In a follow-up study in 2014 that surveyed 400 women from a variety of countries, 74% said they felt sports participation had the potential to accelerate a woman's career, and 61% said they felt their personal involvement in sport had helped their career. So, if more young girls play sport, might this mean we will have more women succeeding in industry in the future? In addition to giving women more confidence in what they can achieve and increasing the likelihood that they will play sport, it is important that men see women's sport on an equal footing. Ultimately, it's about respect. If men and boys respect sportswomen for their achievements, if they are in awe of their accomplishments, if they celebrate women's victories and the incredible talent on display, surely they are more likely to respect the other women in their lives too. Celebrating successful women in sport undoubtedly impacts the way in which a man views his colleagues and female family members. And recognising that women can be strong and powerful is important for the mental health of men and boys too. Accepting women's success can reduce the pressure men feel to always be the protector, the breadwinner, the strongest part of any partnership. Allowing women to share these roles enables men to be whoever they want to be in a more balanced, equal society. Less pressure is ultimately better for men's mental health. Men can be themselves. Sport is also an enormous commercial sector. In 2018, the global sports market was valued at $471 billion, according to Statista. When women are excluded from sports throughout their lives, it's more likely they will also miss out on the opportunity to work in this incredibly exciting, fulfilling, and lucrative sector. It only takes a quick review of a sporting landscape to see the huge gender imbalance across many roles. From the leadership of major global sports, broadcast and journalism, through to sports agents, managers, and elite coaches, men, usually white men, still make up the majority of these positions. Things are changing, often helped by the implementation of governance reviews and quotas, but it's important we recognise that women are still often overlooked with the assumption that they don't know sports like men do. Hard to believe it was 45 years ago that the Sex Discrimination Act of 1975 stipulated that employers could not discriminate against people on the grounds of their gender. Finally, what does it all mean to the female athletes themselves? The powerful thoughts of professional female golfer Megan McLaren superbly summarise why equality in sport matters. Here's what she shared on Twitter in the summer of 2020. Please bear with me, because I'm more tired than anyone of the supply and demand argument when it comes to gender equality in golf. This isn't a woke, millennial take on having every possible demographic equally represented at the highest level. I can't speak for others and how they feel or are valued. I don't have that experience. But I have experience of how it can feel to be a female in this world. That's the point that keeps getting missed. Ultimately, it's just about respect. That's all. Have you ever thought about how opportunity creates opportunity, or how success breeds success, or how talent pushes talent? How many elite female golfers do we miss out on because they can't see their worth? Can't see a role model in the magazine they pick up because out of almost 200 pictures in a leading publication, there isn't one of a woman? Can't see a role model in the first 5 pages of the golf section on a national news site because it appears women's tours don't exist? And if we dare to point this out, we are told that the interest just isn't there, that we don't engage, don't entertain, aren't worthy of your time in the way that men are. Why? Because our skills aren't as great? Really? Men's sport dominates primarily because in the beginning, and ever since, people with power, men, chose to invest in it. I know times are changing. I'm lucky to be in an era where we can even discuss this. And I fucking love getting to do what I do for a living. But it's 2020, and just look at some of the comments. I'm not demanding you become a fan of women's golf. Each to their own, genuinely. But everyone needs to recognise that our choice to be a fan is shaped by the way the world works, not necessarily by us. Thank you so much for listening to the serialisation of my book Game On, The Unstoppable Rise of Women's Sport. If you'd like a copy, it's available in hardback and paperback in all good bookshops and online. The Game Changers podcast is free to listen to on all podcast platforms. Head over to fearlesswomen.co.uk to find out more about all of the incredible game changers I've spoken to in previous series. There are over 100 of them, including elite athletes, journalists, coaches, scientists, broadcasters, and CEOs. As well as listening to all the episodes on the website, you can find out more about the Women's Sport Collective, a free, inclusive network for all women working in sport. And you can register for the Fearless Women newsletter, a weekly review of the global developments in women's sport. Do come and say hello on social media, where you'll find me on LinkedIn, Instagram and Twitter at Sue Anstiss. finally, if you've enjoyed the podcast, I'd be so grateful if you could do 2 things. Firstly, if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, I'd really appreciate it. And secondly, if there's anyone in your life, at home or at work, who you think might enjoy the podcast, please do let them know about it and help us spread the word about women's sport and the stories of these incredible game changers.